Any further questions? I have a couple myself, actually. This follows along Councillor Taylor's questioning. In terms of, you just mentioned that you anticipate the charges increasing in other municipalities once they complete their studies. Is there any disadvantage in your mind to being the first mover on this then, when we look at the rural nature of Norfolk County and we want to be competitive to attract industry here? And now we're going to, have higher development charges in some of these other regions. Would there be a benefit to having them set their charges and looking at sort of the movement in those areas first? Okay. And as part of this analysis then, do you look at other municipalities to determine sort of the competitive nature in there? Or is this strictly, these are our costs and this is our, calculated recovery? Okay. Now, you mentioned at the beginning as well that the needs were established by council, and I see we have a number of things that are written out on that current versus calculated charges, but there's obviously breakdown within those, correct? Would it be possible to see what that breakdown looks like of what the needs were previously determined?
Yes, so that's the background study.
Okay.
So what you will see in that document is no other growth forecast. You will see for each of those services the specific for the forecast period and what share of those are moving to the published.
Okay. I've just been informed your microphone's off, so if you wouldn't mind turning that off. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
And I just had one more, and this is going to seem a little bit strange, but within sort of the parks and recreation services, I know you mentioned landscaping was something that was included in a development charge. Is that correct?
It can be, yes.
And is it here in Norfolk, do you know?
I'd have to reference the specifics of it, but typically to the extent that there's landscaping requirements as a part of the development of parks or with any recreational site, then they would be included in those capital cost estimates.
So this is something that, I'm hoping we're going to look further into in terms of planning charges and so on that take place here, but I'm assuming there would have to be some sort of protection against double charging individuals for some of these items. As an example being, when I read through some of the planning bylaws that are coming forward, there's charges being allocated to people for planting trees on public property. I know in many municipalities, in fact, that's a free service that's offered, and here in Norfolk, we charge $475 a tree. So I'm just wondering how we're balancing charging landscaping in a development charge and then forcing that same developer to equally pay for a further
And
charge.
that's a good question. So there are a couple of safeguards in that methodology that we referred to. So partly, if as a condition of development, you're requiring developers not to just provide you with parkland, but provide it at a landscaped level, those costs don't show up in the DC, right? Also, to the extent that those landscape costs that are included for any of those projects have an offsetting contribution that would come from a planning application or something else, those would have to be considered and deducted.
Okay.
Right.
So this wouldn't be a case though of parkland. This is direct, streetscaping alongside properties and so on. So I don't believe that would fall within the parkland.
Right, so similarly with respect to roads, right? So to the extent that we have road improvements that are being identified in the capital budget that are being included in the DC, if there are contributions towards that aren't growth related, they would be deducted through the process.
Okay. Myself personally, I'd be curious to know whether or not that formed, whether landscaping formed part of our charges in the past as well.
And I can review that and provide comment back.
That'd be great. Any further questions from anyone? Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we will hold the staff report until after the public meeting, and we will proceed with the public hearing. So I'd now like to officially open the public meetings held under the Planning Act, Municipal Act, and the Funeral, Burial, and Cremation Services Act. I advise those in attendance that the local planning tribunal has the power under the Planning Act to dismiss an appeal to either a zoning bylaw and/or an official plan amendment if the appellant does not make oral submissions at the public meeting or does not make written submissions to Norfolk County Council before the zoning bylaw is passed and/or before the official plan amendment is adopted. A reminder to those residents that desire to address council tonight to state your full name, your address, when you come forward to the podium. So the first report we have this evening is staff report DCS 18-102. I now officially call open the public meeting on that report, and Ms. Cull is here to present.
Thank you. This is an application proposing to change the zoning of the subject lands from general industrial to urban residential type 6 and to permit a reduction in the minimum required front yard, maximum floor area ratio, and minimum number of parking spaces. The intent of this application is to allow for the construction of a 4-story apartment building. The subject lands are 0.56 hectares in size and are bound by Chapel Street, Head Street South, Stanley Street, and Metcalf Street in Simcoe. The lands are vacant and are surrounded by residential and commercial uses. A neighbor has called me to discuss some questions. She had concerns about the proximity of the parking area to her house and her hedge. So the applicant is required to maintain a setback of 3 meters between the parking lot and the dwelling on her property, and additional buffering measures may be available for implementation through the site plan process. The neighbor also asked about whether a traffic study would be required, and this would also be submitted at the site plan stage. The subject lands are designated urban residential in the official plan, which permits the proposed R6 zone. The requested relief related to reduced parking is also appropriate in this instance, as the development is intended to be designed for retirees who generally require fewer parking spaces. The floor area ratio is intended to prevent high-density residential properties from becoming overdeveloped, and in this case, there is adequate space available on the property to meet the requirements of the apartment building. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment implements the intent of the official plan and represents good planning. Staff support this application and recommend that it be approved.
Thank you, Ms. Cull. Any questions from council? Mr. Taylor, or Mr. Rabbits, my apologies.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Sorry, my question pertains to page 34. We had some comments from forestry and cemeteries in regards to potential for a tree planting plan. And this harkens back to the comments you had made earlier, Mayor Chop, regarding the expense to planting a tree in Norfolk County, $475. Do we know if we're having any trees planted with this project?
Through the mayor, so usually that would be determined at the site plan stage. Usually either trees are required on the property or you pay the fee to development and community services, and they will plant trees for you along the right-of-way.
Thank you for that explanation. My next question is on page 43. We had a section stating that the county shall ensure a full range of housing types, densities are provided to meet the anticipated demand for demographic change. All forms of housing required to meet social health and the well-being of current and future residents, including those with special needs, shall be encouraged. We've got a target of the county shall target 15% of all new housing built in Norfolk County to be multi-residential. We've acknowledged that this is going to be a multi-residential dwelling. I was wondering if we're on par to hit that target of 15%, and how might the public or even council know, is this going to be making a significant impact toward that target, or where are we in terms of hitting that 15%?
Through the mayor, I don't have the answer to that right now, but I can definitely look into it and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. So the setback required between lots 7 and 6, this is on page 18 of the report. You said that there is going to be that 3-meter setback.
Through the mayor, so there has to be 3 meters from the neighbor's house on lot 7 and the edge of the parking lot. And when I did look at the draft site plan they provided, it looks like they can definitely meet that setback.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Any further questions? Thank you, Ms. Call. Is the applicant, and I apologize if I don't pronounce this properly, Danny Dominics, of an agent of J.H. Cahoon in attendance? Thank you, sir.
I'm trainable. We've read the planning staff report, and we're fully supportive of the recommendations. We've also heard the comments of the neighbors and feel that those can be addressed at the site plan approval process, or during that process. I'm just happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions? Or Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Mr. Phillips, on page 4 of 18 of the staff report, there are eight conditions there. Do you understand and agree with all those 8 requirements?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
At this time, I would like to invite anyone who would like to speak in favor of the application to come forward to the podium. Please, when you come up, be sure to state your name, full name for council. Is there anybody here today in favor?
Your Worship, my name is Sandra Drinkwalter. I am kind of short. I live at 122 Head Street South, and my property will be surrounded on both my north and my west side by this proposed development. So I wish to voice some concerns. I have no objection to the rezoning of the area to zone 6R, but the second addendum asks for relief from the 96 parking spaces required to 78 spaces for the proposed 52-unit apartment building. I suggest that there will be congestion on the surrounding roads because there is restricted parking on 3 roads and no parking on Chapel Street. The plan states that the developer proposes a parking lot on Lot 6, the lot immediately north of me. The plan shows parking with a buffer of 1 foot off my property line. My home is less than 2 feet, 1.6 feet from that line. The lot line runs through an established hedge that has been there for approximately 60 years. So there will be parking 2.5 feet off my patio and 2.5 feet from the north side of my home, which is a designated historical residence. I suggest I will lose considerable privacy and the enjoyment of my backyard. Now, on the west side of my property, The parking there has a buffer of 3 feet away from my property line. And my question here is, why is there not a 3-foot buffer on my north side? And is there a bylaw regarding this? Now, I didn't quite catch what Ms. Cole said when she was up here. I think it inappropriate that vehicles will be less than 3 feet from my home and my patio. Another concern is surface water runoff from this property. I lived at 132 Head Street South for 46 years until the co-op, former owners of the land, put a berm around me. I had considerable runoff and also problems with snowplow jockeys who pushed the snow on my hedges, destroying the berm and a once existing fence. So where snow is piled will be a concern. Those basically are my comments and my major concerns. And I thank you for your considerations.
Thank you for coming today. Councillors, do you have any further questions? Councillor Michelli?
Ms. Drinkwalter, we heard earlier that all of the neighbors' concerns had been addressed. Clearly, that's not the case.
Well, she made Ms. Cole made a mention of 3 meters from, I didn't quite catch what she fully said. So if it's going to be 3 meters off my lot line, is that what you're saying?
If I could interrupt here, Councillor Michelli, just since we're all new to this process a little bit, I just asked clarification from the clerk. You would be able to direct any questions to staff to assist in answering some of these questions if you so chose.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. Drinkwalter. Then this is for Ms. Cull.
Through the mayor, there's a required setback between the edge of the parking lot and Ms. Drinkwalder's home of 3 meters, so about 10 feet from your house to the parking lot.
That satisfies me. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all.
You're welcome. Councillor Columbus?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. You mentioned the privacy issue, and of course, this building's going to be 4 stories high, I guess.
Yeah.
What do you think would enhance your privacy so that it would make you comfortable?
Well, it'd have to be less than 4 stories high.
Right. So
That's
it's almost like it's not doable from what I understand here.
Yeah, but now that I realize that it's a senior apartment building, I don't think I'm risking too many people on the 4th floor robbing beer bottles to my backyard.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, you can have a seat. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would wish to speak to this application? Okay. And is there anything further from council at this time? May I have a verbal motion to close the public? Oh, my apologies, Councillor Rabbits. Councillor Rabbits.
I had one question through the mayor to staff, and particularly I wanted to ask this question of Mr. Baird. I'm looking at page 50, and I'm looking at the corner of Chapel Street and Metcalf, and I just wanted to acknowledge that we do have the entrance to the Simcoe Town Center immediately across from what looks to be just the end of a parking lot. There's no plan for a sidewalk from our developer in that area, and I was just wanting to acknowledge that we are going to be having traffic flow from the Simcoe Town Center immediately across the street and likely ending up in the corner of this parking lot. And I did notice that we had a nice sidewalk that was around the exterior of the building. I just wanted to provide an opportunity for our staff to perhaps weigh in as to whether or not we're going to be potentially having a sidewalk constructed immediately opposite the Simcoe Town Center and how that would tie in with the development.
Mayor Trop, if I may, and on behalf of Alicia too, I had a chance to speak with our development engineering staff who've been in contact with Cahoon Engineering, and they're in full agreement to providing the necessary sidewalks around that site as part of the site plan requirement. So we'll have really good connectivity for those residents that would call that home and give them access to the mall immediately to the north.
Thank you, Mr. Baird.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cull. Okay, if there's no further questions, I guess now we'll move, if I could have a verbal motion to close the public meeting. I need a mover, Councillor Van Passen, and a seconder, Councillor Rabbits. Oh, sorry, you have it there. And all in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Sorry. Okay. Okay, I guess at this point, I just would like to ask the councillors whether they would like to move the staff recommendation or propose an alternative. Councillor Columbus?
Madam Mayor, I will move the recommendation as printed on page 45 of the report.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Taylor. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, now we will proceed to staff report DCS 18-103. This is an application that has been received to amend the zoning bylaw to permit a ginseng processing facility and retail sales. The facility will process ginseng produced by the farm operation as well as purchase ginseng from other farms. I would now like to open the public meeting on staff report 18-103. This is to Ms. Cull again. If you could present your report to council, please.
This is an application to permit the storage, grading, and processing of ginseng produced by the farm operation as well as by other farms. The applicant originally also requested retail sales at this location, but it was determined through the circulation that the Ministry of Transportation would not grant a commercial entrance at this location, and as such, the application was amended to remove that request. The subject lands are 40 hectares in size and front onto the west side of Highway 24 in the former geographic township of Windham. The lands contain a large agricultural building as well as a single detached dwelling and a detached garage. Agriculture-related uses are permitted as per the updated official plan. The 5-year review included policies in this regard, which allowed the applicants to withdraw the official plan amendment portion of their application and continue with only a zoning bylaw amendment. The proposed amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms the intent of the official plan. This application represents good planning, and planning staff recommend that it be approved.
Thank you, Ms. Cull. Any questions from councillors? Councillor Rabbits.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. My question is pertaining to why the MTO had not supported the retail sales component. I didn't see a lot of detail in the report to that regard. I was just hoping for an explanation.
Through the mayor, so there are comments from the Ministry of Transportation on page 3 of my report, and I know it doesn't say specifically why. Basically, they just have policies about where accesses can be located on provincial highways. They will allow farm entrance here, but not commercial. We kind of tried to work with them on it, but there wasn't really any wiggle room.
Any further questions? Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On page 59, page 3 of 15 on the report, Norfolk County says under development engineering that a new entrance will not be permitted, and you go a couple lines down and the MTO requires a new entrance. So how are we going to work that out between two different jurisdictions?
Through the mayor, they need a second entrance, I believe, so they can have the one entrance that they already have, and they can have the one entrance they already have. They can't have a new second entrance. That's the intent of development engineering's comment.
But if I read through the report, aren't they planning on putting in a new entrance and closing one? Is that the plan?
Through the mayor, they may have done that already, because I think where the house is located, they might have closed that entrance. I know the applicant or the agent is here. He may be able to speak to that more, but they do have a new entrance for the agricultural building on the property.
And further to Councillor Rabbit's comments, if I read the MTO's criteria correctly, they don't allow an entrance within 1.6 kilometers of an existing crossroad.
Through the mayor, that's correct.
Oh, I should explain to them, us folks in the countryside, they laid out concessions a mile apart, so unless we're missing a road, that means there's none allowed anywhere. Okay, thank you.
I just have two questions, actually. How did the Ministry of Transportation become involved in this?
We circulate them on applications that are fronting onto provincial highways because we know that the applicant has to get a permit from them. So it's good to kind of work these issues out in advance.
And the second question would be, what would the retail operation have looked like? What are we losing in Norfolk County as a result of this not being allowed by the ministry?
So technically, we're not really losing anything because they have an existing retail facility just at the corner of Highway 24 and Wyndham Road 3 already, so they're going to keep using that. But I'm sure they would have had kind of a new, more modern, updated facility at this location.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Cull. Any further questions? You can have a seat. Thank you. Is the applicant of the agent from Civic Planning Solutions in attendance?
Good evening. I've reviewed the staff report in agreement with it. I was not surprised by MTO's comments. In fact, I had spoken with them very early on in the process, and you are correct, the way especially on 24 North, there really is no possibility for a new commercial entrance, but that's not something municipality, in fact, has any control over. The MTO permit system is, in fact, not subject to OMB appeals, any type of municipal objection or anything. Most of my work is along the Highway 3 corridor between Dunnville and St. Thomas, and I wasn't surprised. The proposal here strictly is the processing of ginseng. My clients do grow their own ginseng. They have other growers grow it on contract for them, and also will be purchasing some additional ginseng. The idea being it will allow them to operate at a scale that's going to be viable from a business perspective. But beyond that, it's a pretty straightforward application.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you.
Councilors, do you have any questions for Mr. Rowe?
Thank you.
Sir. I would like to invite anybody else here in the audience today who would like to speak in favor of the application to come forward to the podium. Okay, seeing none. And anybody in attendance that would like to speak in general or in opposition to the application? And is there anything further from the applicant at this time? Okay. Anything further from council? And if I could have a verbal motion to close the public meeting. Councillor Michelli, and a seconder, Councillor Geisens. All in favor? And that's carried. Would someone like to move the staff recommendation or propose an alternative? Councillor Rabbits,
I will move the staff recommendation as printed.
and a seconder, Councillor Taylor. All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, now we have staff report DCS 18-104. This is an application to amend the Norfolk County official plan and zoning bylaw to permit the establishment of 10 glamping sites and to use the existing barn for small concerts, birthdays, and bridal showers. Jonathan Yeager and agent Douglas Valley has put forth the application affecting the lands as described. I'd now like to call the public meeting open on DCS 18-104. Ms. Cull, will you please present your report?
This is an application to permit the establishment of 10 glamping sites and to permit special events within the existing barn on the property. The subject lands are 6.9 hectares in size and front onto the south side of St. John's Road in the former geographic township of Woodhouse. The lands contain a single detached dwelling and a barn and slope down toward the Lynn River. The lands are also adjacent to the Lynn Valley Trail and are partially forested. Planning staff are of the opinion that this application is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to the official plan regarding limited non-agricultural uses in the agricultural designation. Staff support this application and recommend that it be approved.
Any questions from council? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Call. Oh, Councilor Martin.
Thank you. I just wondered if you could speak to the difference in this chart here about, forgive me, I'm going to say it wrong again, the on-farm diversification versus the non-agricultural uses. You provided information on both, and one is in the recommendation.
Through the mayor, on-farm diversified uses are subject to a set of criteria in our official plan. So they have to be located on a farm is the first and sort of biggest criteria. And the limited non-agricultural uses section allows for non-farm uses in very limited specific areas that are not also farms. So that's kind of the biggest difference there.
Councilor Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Cole, I noticed that there are no comments received from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And I would think that if this application was 10 years ago, they probably would have commented. Did they get surveyed on this particular application?
Through the mayor, they did get circulated. We just didn't get any comments.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you. Is the applicant Jonathan Yager in attendance?
Thank you very much, Your Worship and members of council. My name is John Valley. I am the president of G. Douglas Valley Limited. We are consulting engineers, architects, land use planners here in the town of Simcoe. Our office is just over at the corner of Talbot and Robinson, short walk from here. With me tonight is our land use planner, Mr. Michael Higgins, who's been directing this project, and also with us tonight are Caroline and Jonathan Jagger, who are the applicants, and they're sitting right here in the front row. I just want to talk to you briefly about this application. It is a fairly simple application to amend the zoning bylaw and the official plan through a creation of a special provision that would apply only to this site. What's proposed are 10 glamping sites, so these are basically a tent with a small deck outside, and then we also want to get approval to be able to use the existing barn that's on site for small special events. What's happened here with this application, it's been circulated to 12 various agencies. All those agencies have come back. There has been not a single objection to the proposal. So we've got buy-in from all of those 12 agencies. We have completed an environmental impact statement because we are near some areas of interest. The environmental impact statement has come up with some recommendations. However, those are all very minor. They note that there's no vegetation to be removed on the site. There's no grading required on the site. There's no species at risk or significant wild habitat identified. The only mitigation measure was to ensure that any site lighting be directed downwards and not into the natural areas. That was the only key recommendation. Your planning staff, as your planner has indicated, did review the application. The official plan, the current official plan, sets out 8 tests that this application has to satisfy. We've satisfied all 8 in our opinion and in the opinion of your staff. And you heard that your staff believes that the application does conform with the intent of your own official plan, and therefore they're recommending approval. We do have 2 items that we are concerned about with the recommendations in the staff report, and the first one deals with site plan control. So the application is recommended to be placed under site plan control. We believe that this is, quite frankly, a little bit of overkill for this small development, especially since we're talking about an existing barn and some tents and decks. There are no changes in grading. There are no changes in servicing. There's no traffic improvements. There's no mitigation required. And therefore, we believe that the site plan, the regular site plan approval is simply overkill. We have talked with staff about this in the last couple of days, and staff have suggested that instead of going through the full-blown site plan, that perhaps what's called a minor site plan could be considered for this site, which is a much less onerous proposal, much less cost to the developer, and significantly reduced review. So our client would be willing to go along with that minor site plan, and we would ask council to direct staff by resolution to ensure that this isn't done as a minor site plan. We also understand from them that review would only be building, bylaw, and zoning. Building, planning, and zoning, that there be no further studies required, and that would be the limit of the site plan approval. Without, as it's worded right now, we're heading for a full-blown site plan approval process. The other concern that we have is in the actual wording in the zoning bylaw. Currently in the zoning, it says, and I'm quoting, "Special events shall not have any outdoor component." So what that means is if these people want to rent out this barn for, say, a bridal shower, and it's a beautiful summer day, and they have some picnic tables sitting outside, that people can't go out and enjoy some food or whatever at a picnic table outside because that would be outdoors. We've always encouraged that when people would come to this site for glamping or for use as such as a bridal shower, that people would be encouraged to tour the gardens and the other natural amenities on the site. We think that this limit on absolutely no outdoor component is a little bit of over restriction, and we'd simply ask that that be deleted from the bylaw. So our summary here is quite simple. 12 agencies have reviewed, there's no objection. Your own planning staff believes that this conforms to the intent of the Norfolk County official plan. There's nothing here that requires, in our opinion, site plan control. However, we are willing to go along with the staff recommendation of a minor site plan to ensure that development proceeds as staff requires. But we would also ask that this issue of outdoor components be deleted from the bylaw, so that if you go to whatever, a bridal shower, that you can go outside and sit on a picnic table and eat your sandwich outside if you want. You don't have to stay inside the building, which is the way the bylaw is recommended now. So our request is, please approve the zoning. I think everyone's on board that the zoning should be approved. Ensure that we're minor site plan only. The circulation limited to planning, building, and the zoning departments. That means not to development engineering or others. There's no further studies required because we've already done those studies, and we'd ask you to confirm this by resolution. And that regarding the outdoor components, we'd ask that you simply delete those words, that special events shall not have any outdoor component. We ask that you simply delete those words from the bylaw. If you have any questions, we are here to assist you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Mayor Chop. On page 9 of the report, it says the size would not allow excessively large events. I'm just wondering how many people they expect to be attending these events?
So right now, I think it says on page 9, my page 9, are you looking at the planning report, I'm sorry? So I'm seeing 90 square meters in size, that's roughly the size of the existing barn. So they have events that can be anywhere from 5 people to 50 people to perhaps 100 people that could fit in that space.
Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
I too was going to speak to that, the number of people in the barn, and I was lucky enough to actually tour this property and see the barn myself, and it is a small barn. It's not by any means a large event center. Additionally, I wondered about proximity to neighbors. I noticed there weren't any notes of opposition from any neighbors, no concerns of noise. Is that correct?
That's correct. I do understand there was some communication from one of the neighbors when their concern was people who are on this site basically going and trespassing on their site. We do have the advantage that we're buffered there by a creek. People would have to actually cross the creek to get to that property. There have been events held on this site in the past through special permit, and this has, to our knowledge, not been an issue in the past. So it's a large site. It's set well back from any other residential uses in the area.
Right. Okay, and then additionally, a question to staff with regards to site plan. Hi, sorry. I just wondered how that works. How do you minimize a site plan? In which case, if you're willing to do so, why not remove it all?
Through the mayor, so we do have a minor site plan process. It's generally used for properties such as this that are rural. They don't connect to services, that sort of thing. So that was our intention all along, to do the minor site plan process. And it also would assist with I believe a letter was distributed to you from the neighbor. And their concern isn't just that people would be trespassing, it's that how much that area is being used. We could look into some sort of buffering or fencing or that kind of thing as part of the site plan, which would help alleviate their concerns.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Hoffman.
Just if you could clarify for me, why was the point made about no outdoor use?
Through the mayor, that's what the applicant applied for. So the application itself says events within the existing barn. Planning staff never evaluated it based on outside events because they didn't apply, so we didn't know that's what they wanted. If it were to be changed, we would hope it would be circulated to the neighbors so that they would have that opportunity as per the Planning Act to be notified and receive feedback, because it does substantially change the application.
Okay, so what would be, in terms of substantially changing the application, in what way could you, sorry?
Through the mayor, so currently the barn is 90 square meters and all events would be naturally limited in size based on that. If outdoor events were permitted, that could potentially be hundreds of people. So it changes it in that way, because there's nothing to limit the size then.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So on that subject then, the applicant applied for just indoor usage of the barn, and now Mr. Valley's asking for outdoor opportunities to look after the public as well. So should we be deferring this then, being that the neighbors were of the mind that everything would be held indoors, right? Are you recommending deferral then?
Through the mayor, I would recommend deferral so we can bring it back with proper public notice.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Martin.
This may be a question for Mr. Valley as well. Would it be advisable to move forward with a portion, maybe the glamping aspect? I don't know. Maybe I'll get an opinion from both of you. The glamping aspect, and then revisit or approve it as is and revisit the addition of the outdoor event. Is that something that would be possible or of interest to the applicants?
Through the mayor, I think we'd have to do two bylaws in order to do that, or approve one and then approve the other. And it will also have to go back to the Norfolk Environmental Advisory Committee. It can go on January 14th. They just need to know that there's going to be this outdoor component so they can decide whether it needs to be studied further or anything like that. But I would recommend it moving forward all at once.
I have a question here from Ms. Call. Would you be able to direct me? I just had Mr. Gazelle looking it up, but where it states that there is a prohibition on outdoors, is that in the official plan or in the zoning bylaw itself?
It is in the bylaw that I drafted for this report. So it states, I believe Andy would have it. But it basically limits.
So this is a site-specific restriction that you're placing?
Yes.
So how do you justify when we have other sites, breweries in rural areas that have outdoor activities, as we try to make sure everything is equitable for all parties, why would this be a site-specific issue?
Generally, all of the breweries would have gone through a site-specific zoning as well that allows outdoor events. So they would have also been evaluated and circulated to the neighbors. So for example, I believe Charlottesville Brewing allows wedding reception, or wedding ceremonies up to 100 people, which is an outdoor event. That's a site-specific zone on that property.
And in terms of the new zoning with the addition with the wineries and breweries in the official plan, how does that conform? You're saying then on each case, the applicant must come forward and identify that there's going to be outdoor activities and apply for that separately?
I'm not sure I'll let Pam answer that one, just because I'm not sure how that zoning's moving forward.
Thank you. To the mayor, to council, good questions. I think to put this in a little bit of context, it's not that planning staff are opposed to the outdoor use on this property. We just think that it should go back through public notice. Usually in the case of providing information, we know what the outdoor space is, and then through the bylaw, we can provide that information accordingly in a number. Excuse me. So we provide a bylaw that says so many square meters are allowed for the outdoor use, and that provides us the opportunity to be enforcement for future if needed. That has been the case of some ag diversification. The policies around ag diversification are a little bit different in regards to this application, and they're also changing. They've just changed on our new Norfolk County official plan.
It seems an onerous process for somebody to go through when there are no neighbors and we're talking about a rural piece of property. My recommendation today, I think, would be to proceed with the application as it is, and then we look at adding the additional outdoor component for all, but as applying to any comments on that?
Through the mayor to council, it would be my understanding that that would be different than the application at hand, and we wouldn't want to have an additional application for the clients or the agent. So again, I think as staff, we can bring this back towards council for the January 15th council meeting. That would allow us time to go to NEAC and have a proper bylaw, including the outdoor space, for you to consider.
Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just got to get in my head, we're not talking about designating outdoor space for specific events so much as so many people will fit within the building and they're going to be allowed to walk around the property at the same time. They might even have a little drink in their hand and a sandwich while they're walking around the property, but it's not like we're going to have a Woodstock concert in the backyard with 10,000 people. Is that what the
I would tend to
at?
agree, and also I would think by the very nature of glamping that is an outdoor activity in and of itself, and people would stay outside.
I also like to make the comment that, talk to some of the neighbors, that property's going full circle. That used to be the local cider mill, and the local entrepreneur also made some a little bit better cider that some of the neighbors remember going there and having some, but not remember coming back. So they've been entrepreneurs in Norfolk for a long time. So,
Mr. Valley.
I do just want to clarify two things. If council looks in the actual bylaw, which is attached to your package, item 3 under that zoning bylaw is the actual wording that will be amended. So you've got zoning bylaw 71-Z-2018 up near the top, and then down the page there are 1, 2, 3, 4 numbered bullet points. Just give you a minute. I don't know where that is in your package. Perhaps page 391 of your package. I don't envy you having a package that has to go to page 391. And I'm sure that's nowhere near the end of it. So if you find that page, and there's items 1, 2, 3, 4, if you look in item 3, the very last line there is, the special event shall not have any outdoor component. That's what we're asking you to delete right there. Now the misunderstanding here appears to be, in our application, we do not say that we're limiting our use to only within the building. We say we want to use the building for these special events. it would seem rather implied that if you say zone the Burning Kiln Winery to be able to host winery and functions, that they may have a patio and that you may be able to go sit outside at that patio and be outside, so that those events are just naturally part of the use of the land. It's pretty difficult to say we're going to zone a build or a site for a land use, but the use can only be within the site. It's like saying at your house, you can have your house there, but you can't go outside. You must stay inside all the time. I think for the kind of uses that we're talking about, especially when it's related to glamping, that the obvious implication here is that there will be some outside component. So while it's not specific in our application that we are also looking for outside use, we have not ever said in our application that we're limited to indoor use. I don't know where that limit of indoor use only, I don't know where that has come from. It's not come from anything that we have submitted. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Valley.
Thank you.
I just, actually, if you could just hang on one second there. My point, in fact, I agree with much of what you've just said, was more so that we don't have to go through this for applications down the road to make a fundamental policy change here. So we can treat your application on that basis today, but looking at this in a broader scale so that we continue to have an equitable basis for anybody that's bringing these applications forward. Like you said, it should be implied that one would be using the space for outdoor events also. And I just have a couple questions on the site plan control issue, actually, for Ms. Dusling.
Thank you.
I don't think it's any secret, my feelings on site plan control, so it's interesting that this has come forward so soon. I didn't expect it. But Section 41 is pretty clear. In fact, I can quote it from memory. The construction, erection, or placing of one or more structures and additions or alterations that have the effect of substantially increasing the usability. So I struggle with even Mr. Yeager having to go through a minor site plan control on this, as this seems to be a Norfolk County-ism as opposed to something that is in line with the Ontario legislature. So if you could please specify how exactly we're coming to site plan control in the first place when the Ontario legislature has clearly defined development in the Act.
To you, Mayor Chop. Yes, you are correct. That does what Section 41 of the Planning Act says, but it also goes on to say that parking is also an opportunity for site plan. And in regards to this specific application, that's more of what the concern is about. It's not so much the glamping sites in particular, but the use of the special events in the barn also includes a parking area. And that's the piece that would be through the Planning Act under required site plan control.
From a legal perspective, I actually would have to disagree, and we could turn it over to Mr. Loeb if he had some comments. But the definition of development actually defines it as a commercial parking lot. And when traditionally, when something is not defined in one act, what will happen, the courts will look to other acts to determine what the intention of the legislature was. And in the case of site plan control in a commercial parking lot, one of the next most logical acts would be to look at the Tax Act as an example. And a commercial parking lot is very clearly defined in the Tax Act as a parking lot where one pays to park. So I guess at this point I'd have a question for Mr. Valley, whether or not there was an intention to charge for parking. Okay, thank you, sir. When you look to bylaws in other municipalities, they too, although we don't have commercial parking lots defined in the Norfolk County bylaws, those municipalities also have very clearly defined what a commercial parking lot is. And in all cases that I can find, they have mirrored, as an example, the Tax Act, where you charge for parking, and there may also be a licensing requirement to that. So to say that we're going to hang our hats on requiring a glamping site to go through a potentially onerous or even a minor site plan control, I don't see how that fits with the intention of the Ontario legislature as falling within the definition of development under the Act.
Through you, Mayor Chop, planning staff are happy to further look into that, to have discussions with our council and get back to you. I think that's probably another good reason for deferral on this specific application. Then we can bring all those details back.
The one thing I hesitate today, it's treating, I think we need to start getting away from treating these issues on a case-by-case basis of waiving site plan control and actually start properly interpreting what the legislature had intended for site plan control to be applied to, and that's the definition of development as enumerated in the Act. So, Councillor Martin.
As a bit of a general comment, being that we're new council, I would really like to see us accomplish issues and give consideration to this couple who may have taken the day off work with a solid proposal that I was able to see, and it is quite lovely.
Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Ms. Doodling, the information that was circulated, was anywhere in that information, was this specific quote from the bylaw in there? Like, was it very specific that special events shall not have any outdoor component, or?
Through you, Mayor Chop, to Councillor Van Passen, the bylaw, that's the way the bylaw was drafted, and the agent was aware of that. The application itself came in to identify the existing barn, and again, as Alicia identified, that's what we processed.
Okay, but the information that was circulated to anyone within 200 feet and anybody in the public, did anybody see this actual draft bylaw that we have in our agenda?
Through you, Mayor Chop, to Councillor Van Passen, no, the only people that we share the bylaw with normally are the agent and the applicant prior to the public meeting, unless someone asks, of course. So the public would have only seen the words "the existing barn" through the public notice.
Okay. So if later on we were to vote on a bylaw that's the draft form is presented and we delete that one sentence, would that hurt anything?
Through you, Mayor Chop, to Councillor Van Passen, we like to be very transparent in the planning world. It would be my suggestion that we would go back through public information and share to the public that there would be outdoor event space. We don't know what we don't hear unless we're provided all the information.
My question to you, would it not be safe to assume, however, if they've been made aware of 10 glamping sites and events taking place in a barn, if I was circulated that information, I wouldn't think that it was going to be contained indoors at all times. I mean, we have a beautiful summer season here in Norfolk, so it would seem to me to make sense that the events would also be held outside.
Through you, Mayor Chap, yes. Again, the clamping is not the piece that we have the outdoor activity on. It's more the event space that we're more concerned to be transparent with the public.
Okay, but my question is, but the public was not made aware that there was not going to be outdoor activities, so...
You're correct.
Okay. Councillor Rabbits.
I just wanted to comment at this point in time that I really appreciate the applicant and agent, Mr. Valley's comments regarding what they're requesting, and I'm fully prepared to move the recommendation with some amendments for a minor site plan, as you sound amenable to, and also to remove the line with the special events shall not have any outdoor component. I will not be supporting a deferral in this matter.
Okay, are there any further questions from councillors before we move to any motions? Councillor Michelli.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We've had a couple of suggestions for some questions that maybe need to be answered in the form of a deferral, and staff seems to believe that a deferral might be in the best interests of everyone to make sure we get this right. So I would speak in favor of deferring this.
Councillor Martin.
I would again like to put this back to Mr. Valley and the applicants, given all this additional information. Could you please clarify what your preference is at this time?
Thank you for your question. Of course, our application for this was submitted back in July, and since that time, the developer's been doing studies and submitting and so on. They obviously would like to move on and get this approved. They don't want to go through the additional expense of going back to NEAC again and all these things. I think it's important to recognize that when Pam Dusling spoke of it's always been in the bylaw, draft bylaw was provided to us late last week, I believe either Thursday or Friday. That's the first time my client saw anything to deal with limiting prohibiting this outdoor use. Again, that was not